Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at a full beginner's guide to the Go programming language. To download Go, we're going to head to the following website and we're going to press on the download button. From the download section, you're going to choose your operating system. In my case, I'm using Microsoft Windows, so I'm going to install the Microsoft Windows file. And once the installation finishes, we're simply going to open the file and follow the steps there to install Go. Next, we're going to verify that we've successfully installed Go. In order to do that, we're going to open command prompt and we're going to run the command go space version. And in here, as long as you don't get an error and a version of Go is shown, that means you've successfully installed Go to your system. The editor we're going to be using for this course is going to be Visual Studio Code, but you can use any editor of your choice. In VS Code, we're going to create a new folder. And we're going to call this folder First Go Program. And in here, we're going to create a new file. So we want to call our file hello. So we're going to write hello. And the extension for a Go file is going to be .go. As it is .py in Python, so we're going to have .go and we're going to press enter. The first line of our file is going to be package main. So in Go, every file belongs to a package and the main package is a special type of package. It indicates that this Go file will be the starting point of our program. That means when we execute it, Go is going to start execution from this file. The next statement we're going to have is import. In quotations, we're going to have FMT, which stands for format. The FMT package provides different functions that are used for formatting input and output. In this program specifically, we're going to be using the println function. Our next line is going to be func main, and we're going to have an empty parentheses, and we're going to have a set of curly braces. So what this line does is it's going to define a function called main. We're going to be seeing what functions are formally later in this video. And inside our main function, we're going to have fmt.println. And in parentheses, we're going to pass in a string or a sequence of characters. So in our case, we're going to pass in hello world. So to access a function from a package, we're going to be using the dot operator. So we're going to have fmt dot, then we're going to pass in the function we want to use. Now this function, as its name suggests, is going to print the text that we passed to it onto the terminal. So now we can save this file and open our terminal. In VS Code, to open your terminal, you can use the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-Backtick. In our terminal, we can see that currently we're in the Go folder, but our hello.go file is located in the first Go program folder. And to navigate to that folder, we're going to use the cd command and we're going to pass in first Go folder. Now, if your folder name has spaces in between, you're going to have to pass it within quotation marks. Once we're here, we're going to use a command that's going to list out the different files that exist in the current folder. This command is the ls command. As you can see, we currently have one file, which is the hello.go file. Now to execute our file, we're going to use the command go build, and we're going to pass in the name of our file and press enter. As you can see in the terminal, nothing happened, but if we list out the files again using the ls command, we can see that a new file has appeared, which is the hello.exe file. And to run this executable file, we're going to have // and we're going to pass in hello.exe. As you can see, hello world gets printed to the terminal. Now, if we make changes to the hello.go file, we can't simply run the executable. That is going to show us the old version of our file. Instead, we are going to have to build the file again. Now, to simplify this process, there's another command we can use. So let's just change something in our code. We're going to add an exclamation mark at the end of our print statement, and we're going to save our file. And in our terminal, first we're going to clear our terminal using the clear command, and we're going to run the command go run followed by the name of our file, which is hello.go. And as you can see, the updated version of our file gets printed to the terminal. So what the run command does is it's going to build our program, and it's also going to run the executable for us. But one thing to note here is that when using the run command, a separate executable file is not created. Instead, it's going to be directly run. Now, before we move on to the next section, there's one more thing we have to do. In our terminal, we're going to navigate to our root folder. That means the folder that contains all our other folders. To go to the previous folder, we can use the command cd followed by 2 dots. And once we're at the root of our project, we're going to run the command go mod init, and we're going to give it a name. You can give it anything. I'm going to give it learn_go and press enter. What this command is going to do is it's going to tell Go that we have a Go project that is located in the current directory. A variable is simply a container that is used to store some sort of data. And in Go, there are several ways that you can use to create a variable. So in order to see that, we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it variables and constants. And in this folder, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it variables.go. Now, as before, we're going to have our package, which is going to be main, and we're going to have our import statement, which is import fmt. Then we're going to define our main function. And in our main function, the first type of declaration we're going to see is going to be var, followed by the name of the variable. In this case, I'm going to pass in number. Next, you're going to have to put in the type of data that this variable is going to store. In our case, it's going to store an integer, so we're going to have int, and we're going to set it equal to a value. Let's just say 5. So here, var stands for variable, and as I said, number is the name of this variable, and int is simply the data type. So this is one way of creating a variable in Go. Another method is having var, let's call it number2, and let's set it equal to 10. So in this declaration, we're not specifying the type of data. When this is the case, the compiler is going to automatically assign the data type based on the value we give it. So in this case, we gave it the value 10. And since 10 is an integer, the compiler is going to give the number2 variable an integer data type. And the third type of declaration is going to be the name of the variable. We're going to call it number3. And we're going to have a colon and an equal sign, and we're going to give it a value. Let's just give it 15. So this is a shorthand notation that we can use to create a variable. Now, once we've declared our variable, we can also change the value. And in order to do that, we're simply going to use the name of the variable. So let's say we wanted to change the number2 variable. So we're going to have number2, and we're going to assign it a new value. Let's say 20. One thing to note here is that you can't change the type of data you store. So if number2 stores an integer, when you reassign it, you also have to pass in an integer value. And at the end of our file, we're going to print out the different variables. So as we saw in the previous section, we're going to use the println function. So we're going to have fmt.println, and we're going to pass in number, and we're going to have another println, and we're going to pass in number2, and finally we're going to pass in number3. Now we can save our file and open the terminal. The first step is going to be navigating to where our variables.go file is. So we're going to use the cd command, and we're going to pass in variables and constants, and in here we're going to use the run command. So we're going to have go run, and we're going to pass in variables.go. As you can see, the 3 values get printed, and the number2 variable has been updated to the value 20. Now, there are different rules that you have to follow when naming your variables in Go. You can pause this video and look at the different rules. These rules include that the variable name must consist of alphabets, digits, and an underscore. That means you can't use any other special characters. And another rule is that your variable name cannot start with a number. And finally, your variable name cannot be a reserved word. So for instance, the func keyword is a reserved word for defining functions, so you cannot use that to name your variables. Next, we're going to look at what constants are. So as the name suggests, constants are containers that store a fixed value or a value that is not going to change. So after the print statements, we can define a constant. To do that, you're going to use the const keyword, and you're going to pass in your variable name. Let's pass in pi. and we're going to give it a value of 3.14. So what makes this different from other variables is that if you try to change it, so we're going to use the name, and we're going to give it a new value. Let's put in 9.81. And if you try to change this, you're going to get an error. So we're going to see this in the terminal. So we're going to open our terminal, and in here, we're going to run the command go run variables.go. As you can see, we get an error that says you cannot assign to pi. This is because pi is a constant variable. Before we move on to the next section, let's take a look at the different types of data that you can store in Go. So there's int that stores integer numbers. There's float that stores decimal numbers. We also have a complex data type that is used to store complex numbers. We have string that stores a sequence of characters. And finally, we have bool that stores a Boolean value, which is either true or false. All the programs that we saw so far have simply displayed some output, but to make our programs more dynamic, we can actually take input from the user. So to see this, we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it taking input, and we're going to create a new file called input.go. So in here, we're going to have package main, and we're going to import the format package, and we're going to define our main function. So in here, we're going to create a program that asks the user for his or her age, and it's going to display their age to the terminal. The function that we're going to use to take input is the scan function, which is from the FMT package. So first, we're going to define a variable called age of type int. Then we're going to prompt the user to enter their age. So we can use fmt.print. So in the previous video, we used println. The difference between print and println is that at the end of println, we're going to have a new line, but when we're using the print function, we're not going to have a new line at the end. In here, we're going to pass in enter your age. So if we were to use the println function, when the user enters their age, it would take them to a new line, but using the print function, they're going to enter their age on the same line. Once we've done that, we're going to use the scan function. So we're going to have fmt.scan, and we're going to pass in the end character, followed by the name of the variable where we want to store the input, which in this case is the age variable. So here we're using the end character, which stands for the address of the variable. We're going to be looking at this more deeply when we discuss pointers and addresses. So for now, you can just use it. And finally, we're going to print out their age. Again, there's a different print function called printf. What makes printf different is that it lets us pass in a format, and we use different identifiers for the different data types. So for integers, we would use %d. For strings, we would use %s, and so on. So we're going to pass in a format, which is going to be UR, followed by %d, years old. Now this %d is an identifier, so we can substitute in an integer in its place. And to do that, we're going to have a comma, and we're going to pass in the value that we want to substitute, which in our case is the age variable. Now we can save our file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to the taking input folder. And in here, we're going to run the command go run, followed by input.go. It's going to ask us to enter our age. I'm going to put in 20. And press enter. As you can see, it prints out you are 20 years old. Just like we do in maths, we can do different operations in Go. To see this, we're going to create a new folder called operations. And we're going to create a new file called operations.go. And in here, we're going to have our main package. And we're going to import the FMT package. And we're going to define our main function. So first, we're going to define two different variables. So we're going to call one num1, and we're going to use the shorthand notation to creating variables, and we're going to give it the value 20. We can also have num2, and we're going to give it a value of 10. In the Go programming language, you can add something called comments, and to add a single line comment in Go, you would use 2 slashes, and to add a multi-line comment, you would use slash followed by asterisk. And to close the multi-line comment, you'd use asterisk followed by a slash. So comments are not executed with our code. They're simply notes that we keep for explaining our code to ourselves or to other programmers. We're going to use a single line comment, and we're going to have arithmetic operations. So the arithmetic operations are addition, subtraction, and so on. So to test that, we're going to have a print function, and we're going to pass in num1 plus num2. Again, we can have another print function, and we're going to pass in num1 minus num2. We can also have num1 times num2. We can also have num1 divided by num2. And finally, we can have num1 modulo num2. So what the modulo operator does is it's going to return the remainder. So it's going to divide num1 by num2, and it's going to return the remainder, which in our case is going to be 0. Another type of operation we can do in Go is logical operations. So to see that, first we're simply going to add a comment that says logical operations, and we're going to have a series of print statements. So first we're going to check num1 equal to num2. So what two equal signs stand for is it's going to check if num1 is equal to num2. We can also have num1 not equal to num2. So to check that, we're going to use an exclamation mark followed by an equal sign. We can also check if num1 is greater than num2, and we can also check if num1 is less than num2. So to see if this works, we're going to save our file and open the terminal, and we're going to navigate to the operations folder, and we're going to run the command go run operations.go. As you can see, we got 30 for 20 plus 10, we got 10 for 20 minus 10, we got 200 for 20 times 10, we got 2 for 20 divided by 10, we got 0 for 20 modulo 10, we got false for 20 is equal to 10, we got true for 20 is not equal to 10, we got true for 20 is greater than 10, and finally we got false for 20 is less than 10. Typecasting is the process of converting the value of one data type to another data type. So to see this, we're going to create a new folder called typecasting. And we're going to create a file called casting.go. In here, we're going to have our package, and we're going to import the FMT library, and we're going to define our main function. So let's say we want to define a variable of type float. So we're going to have var num1, and to represent a float data type, we're going to have float 32. What this means is that the floating number is going to be represented using 32 bits, and we're going to give it a value of, let's say, 2.56. Next, we're going to define a variable called num2 of type integer, and in here we want to cast num1 to an integer. To do that, we're going to have num1, and we're going to pass it to int. So what this is going to do is it's going to cast the floating point number to an integer. Next, we're going to print this out using the printf function. So we're going to have a format which looks like int, and we're going to have an integer identifier which is %d, and we're also going to add a new line character. To do that, we're going to have a backslash followed by n. That means whatever comes next is going to be printed on a new line. Now to substitute to the %d identifier, we're going to pass in num2. Now to see the other way around, we're going to define a variable called num3 of type int, and we're going to give it a value of 5. And we're going to define a variable called num4 of type float. And in here, we want to cast the num3 variable into a float. So we're going to have float 32. And in parentheses, we're going to pass in num3. Now again, we're going to use the printf function to print this out. So the format is going to look like float, and we're going to have a float identifier which is %f, and we're also going to add a new line, and in the %f identifier we're going to substitute in num4. Now we can save our file and head to the terminal. We're going to navigate to our folder using the cd command, and we're going to run go run casting.go. As you can see, the floating point number, which was 2.56, has been casted to an integer, which is going to drop the decimal values and is going to return 2. And the integer value 5 has been converted to a float, meaning that it has a decimal point now. When we want to make decisions in our code, we use conditional statements. So we're going to see two types of conditional statements, which are the if-else statements and the switch statements. So we're going to create a new folder called Conditionals. And we're going to create a new file called ifelse.go. And in here, we're going to have our package main, and we're going to import fmt, and we're going to define our main function. So the program that we're going to create is going to check if a given number is positive, negative, or 0. So we're going to be taking an input. So let's define a variable called number of type int, and we're going to prompt the user to enter a number. We are using the print function instead of println, and we're going to use the scan function, and we're going to pass in the address of the number variable. Now here is where we want to make different decisions. So to use an if statement, we're going to have if followed by a certain condition, and we're going to have a block of code. So what is going to happen is, as long as the condition is true, then whatever is inside the if statement is going to get executed. We can also have an if followed by an else statement. So what this is going to do is, when the condition is false, it's going to execute whatever is inside the else statement. One more thing we can do is we can have multiple conditions. So we can have else if followed by another condition. And we're going to have a block of code. So what is going to happen? We're going to check the first condition. If that is not true, then we're going to check the second condition. And finally, if both of them are not true, we're going to go to the else statement. So we're going to have if, and we're going to pass in number greater than 0. So if this is true, then we want to print out your number is positive. We're going to have another condition, so we're going to use else if, and we're going to pass in number less than 0. So if the number is less than 0, we want to print out your number is negative. Now finally, if both conditions are not true, that means the number is 0. So we can have an else statement, and we can print out your number is 0. Before we run our code, we need to make a small change. When we are using multiple else if and else statements, we need to have them on the same line as the closing if statement. So we're going to close our if block, and we're going to have an else if. And once we close our else if block, then directly after, we're going to have our else block. Now we can save our file and open the terminal, and we're going to navigate to the conditionals folder, and we're going to go run ifelse.go. It asks us to enter a number. We're going to put in, let's say, 10. It's going to tell us our number is positive. We can run it again and pass in 0. We get your number is 0. And finally, if we pass in a negative number, we get your number is negative. Now, when we have multiple conditions to check, instead of using multiple else if statements, we're going to use the second type of conditional statement, which is the switch statement. So in our conditionals folder, we're going to create a new file called switch.go, and we're going to have package main, and we're going to import fmt, and we're going to define our main function. So the program that we are going to create is a program that takes in a score and is going to give a grade based on the score. So we're going to be taking the score from the user. So we're going to create a variable called score of type int, and we're going to use the print function to prompt the user to enter a score. And we're going to use the scan function to store whatever the user inputs and the address of the score variable. Now to store the grade, we're going to create another variable called grade, which is going to be of type string. And here is where we're going to make the decisions. So we're going to use a switch statement. So we're going to have switch, and we're going to have curly braces. And in here, we're going to define different cases. So each case is equivalent to having an else if statement. So the first case, for example, is going to be if score is greater than or equal to 90. In that case, we want to set the grade variable to an A. Now we can define multiple cases. So we're going to have another one that's going to check if score is greater than or equal to 80. In that case, we're going to set grade to B. We're also going to check if score is greater than or equal to 70. In that case, grade is going to be C. Next, we're going to check if score is greater than or equal to 60. In that case, grade is going to be D. And finally, we're going to have what is called a default case. So what this default means is that when all the cases don't match, in that case, we're going to go to the default case. So in our case, it's going to be when the score is less than 60. In that case, none of the above cases match, so it's going to go to the default. And in the default, we're going to set grade to an F. Now, finally, we're going to display the grade. So we're going to have a print F, and our format is going to be your grade is followed by a string identifier and a new line character. And we're going to substitute in the grade variable. Now we can save this file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to the conditionals folder, and we're going to run go run switch.go. It asks us to enter a score. I'm going to put in 90 and press enter. It tells us that our grade is A. We can run it again and give it, let's say, 65. It says your grade is D. And finally, let's give it a score less than 60. Let's put in 50 and press enter. It tells us that our grade is an F. When we want to repeat a certain piece of code multiple times, we use what is called loops. So we can have two conditions that might arise when we're using loops. The first one is when we know how many times our loop is going to run beforehand. And the second is when we don't know how many times our loop is going to run. So let's create a new folder called loops. And we're going to create a file called forloops.go. And in here, we're going to have package main, and we're going to import fmt, and we're going to define our main function. So the program that we're going to create is a program that prints the multiplication table up to 10 for a given number. So since we're going to be taking that number from the user, we're going to define a variable called num of type int, and we're going to have a prompt that says enter the number. And we're going to use the scan function to store this value inside the num variable. So the syntax that we have to follow is we're going to have for, then we're going to have an initializing expression, then we're going to have a semicolon, then we're going to have a condition, and finally we're going to have an increment or a decrement. So how this works is we're going to have an initial expression that's going to get incremented or decremented every time, and is going to be checked with the condition that we provide. And as long as that condition is true, whatever is inside the for block is going to get repeated. So we're going to have for, and our initializing expression is going to be I. Using the shorthand, we're going to have colon equals 1. Then our condition is while I is less than or equal to 10. And we're going to increment I by 1. So there's a shorthand to do that as well. We can simply write I plus plus. And inside our for statement, we're going to have a printf. And the format is going to be %d x %d equals %d followed by a new line. So in the first %d, we want to substitute in the number. In the second %d, we want to substitute in I. And in the final %d, we want to substitute in num times I. So what is going to happen here? First, I is going to be 1. So our print statement is going to be, let's say the user inputs 5. So it's going to be 5 times 1 equals 5. Then in the second iteration, I is going to be incremented by 1. So I is going to be 2. And it's going to be checked with the condition. So since 2 is less than or equals to 10, we're going to go inside the for loop. And we're going to have 5 times 2 is equal to 10. And in the next iteration, I is going to be 3. It's going to be checked with the condition. Then it's going to get printed out. This is going to go on until I becomes 11. In that case, the condition is going to be false since 11 is not less than or equal to 10. In that case, we're going to break out of our for statement. So we can save this file and open our terminal, and we're going to navigate to the loops folder, and we're going to run go run for loops.go. So it's going to ask us to enter a number. Let's put in 5 and press enter. As you can see, it prints out the multiplication table for the number 5. Now in this program, we knew how many times our program was going to run, which in our case was 10 times. Now let's see how we deal with a program where we don't know how many times our for loop is going to repeat. So we're going to head to the loops folder, and we're going to create a new file called forloops2.go, and we're going to have our package, and we're going to import fmt, and we're going to define our main function. So the program that we're going to create is a guessing game. So a user is going to be asked to put in a guess, and we're going to tell the user that the guess is either lower or higher than the secret number. So first, let's define the secret number. So we're going to have secret number. Using the shorthand, we're going to give it a value of, let's say, 27. And we also need to take in a guess from the user. So we're going to define a guess variable. And this time we're simply going to have the word for, and we're going to have a block. So in the for loop, we're going to prompt the user to enter a guess. And we're going to store that guess using the scan function to the guess variable. Now in here, we're going to have multiple conditions. So the first condition we want to check is if guess or the user's guess is equal to the secret number. In that case, we want to print out congratulations, you guessed the secret number. And after we print out the statement, we don't need the loop anymore. And to break out of our loop, we can use the keyword break. So what this is going to do is it's going to exit out of our for loop. Now we're going to have another condition. So we're going to have else if, and the second condition is if guess is less than secret number. In that case, we want to print out too low, since the guess is going to be too low and they need to guess a higher number. And finally, we're going to have an else statement that's going to print too high. So this is going to get executed if the guess is greater than the secret number. Now we can save this file and open our terminal, and we're going to navigate to the loops folder, and we're going to run go run for loops2.go. We're getting an error that says secret number declared and not used. That is because we misspelled it in our code, so we're going to fix that. So we're going to go to the secret number variable, and we're going to fix the spelling. So we're going to have secret number equal to 27. Now we can save our file and run the command again. So we're going to go to our terminal, and we're going to run the command again. It asks us to enter a guess. Let's put in 100. It says too high, so we're going to guess lower than that. Let's put in 10. It says too low, so we're going to guess a higher number. Let's put in 20. It says too low again. We're going to put in a higher number. Let's put in 25. It's too low again. Let's put in 26. And finally, let's put in 27. And it displays, congratulations, you guessed the secret number. Now, just like the break statement that we saw to break out of the loop, there is another keyword that we can use called the continue keyword. Now, to see how we can use that, we're going to go back to our forloops.go file. And in our for loop, we're going to add a condition. Let's say if I is equal to 3, then we want to continue. So what this is going to do is when I is equal to 3, it's going to enter the if statement and it's going to see the continue keyword. That is going to send it back to the top of the for loop. That means it's going to skip the current step or the current iteration and it's going to continue to I equals 4. So to see this, we're going to save our file and open the terminal and we're going to navigate to loops and we're going to run go run for loops.go. We're going to put in 5. Now, as you can see, 5 times 3 has been skipped. That is because we used the continue keyword. An array is a collection of similar types of data. So this could be an array of grades or an array of names. So let's create a new folder called arrays and slices. And we're going to create a new file called arrays.go. And we're going to have our package main. And we're going to import fmt. And we're going to define our main function. Now to create an array, we're going to use the following syntax. So we're going to have var, then the name of our array. Then we're going to set it equal to square brackets. And inside the square brackets, we're going to pass in a number. This number is going to represent the size of our array. And finally, we can have curly braces and we can directly pass in the values. So we can have value 1, comma, value 2, comma, value 3. This is going to be the same amount of values as the size we provided. We can also have the different values on a separate declaration, which we are going to see. So let's define an array that stores ages. So we're going to have var. We're going to call it array of ages. And the size is going to be 3. And one thing I forgot in the syntax, you also have to put in the data type before you list the values. So in our case, it's going to be of type int. And let's just give it different ages. So we can put in 20, 22, and 24. Now we're going to see this, so let's print this out using the println function. First, let's pass in array of ages. Now when we want to access an individual element from an array, we can use its index. So indexing in programming starts from 0. That means the index of the value 20 is going to be 0, the index of 22 is going to be 1, and the index of 24 is going to be 2. So let's say we wanted to print out 22. So we would have print ln. First, we're going to have the name of the array. Then using square brackets, we can pass in an index. So since we want 22, which is at index 1, we're going to pass in 1. We can also update the values of the array. So what we can do is, let's say we wanted to change 24 to 30. The first thing we need to do is access the 24 element, which is at index 2. So we're going to have array of ages at index 2. And we can simply give it a new value. Let's put in 30. Now to see if the value has changed, we're going to print out the array of ages. Now let's save this and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to the arrays and slices folder and we're going to run arrays.go. So first we printed out the whole array. Then we accessed the element at index 1, which was 22. Then we updated the value at index 2, which was 24 to 30. Then we printed out the array again, and as you can see, the value has been updated. As I said before, you do not have to provide the values immediately. So let's say we have an array of scores. So if we wanted to store 3 scores, we're simply going to have square brackets and we're going to pass in 3 and we're going to give it a data type, which in our case is going to be int. So when we're not going to define the values immediately, we do not need to use the equal sign. So to populate or to give different values, we can use indexing. So we can have array of scores at index 0 and we're going to set it equal to 98. Now I'm going to leave the other spots unchanged to show you what happens. So let's print out the array. So we're going to have println and we're going to pass in array of scores. Now we can save this file and head to the terminal and we're going to run the same command again. So as you can see, when we print out the array, the values that we did not touch are going to get populated by zeros. This is because our array deals with integers. If we had an array of strings, instead of zeros, we would have had empty strings. One more thing we can see here is that we can access the length of an array using the len function. What we can use this for is we can pass it into a for loop and we can print out the different values of an array on a separate line. So let's define a for loop. We're going to set I to 0 since indexing starts from 0. And our condition is going to be while I is less than len, and in parentheses we're going to pass in array of ages. So len array of ages is going to be 3 and we're going to increment the I variable. Now in here we simply want to print out the different values. To do that we're going to pass in array of ages and using indexing we're going to use the value of I. So in the first iteration I is going to be 0, that means the first element of our array. Then I is going to be 1, which is the second element of our array. And finally, I is going to be 2, which is going to be the third element of our array. So we can save this file and head back to the terminal. And we're going to run the same command again. As you can see, each values of our ages array gets printed out on a separate line. When we created this folder, we didn't only have arrays, we also added slices. So the difference between an array and a slice is that an array has a fixed size. That means once you define the size of your array, you cannot change it. But when it comes to slices, they have a flexible size. So to see that, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it slice.go. And we're going to have our package. And we're going to import fmt. And we're going to define our main function. So when we want to create a slice, we can actually use the shorthand notation. So let's say we wanted to have a slice of numbers. So we can say numbers, and we're going to have colon equals to, and we're going to have empty square brackets. Since the size is flexible, we need to define its data type. We're going to pass in int, and let's just give it 3 values initially. And we're going to print this slice using println. Now, since the size is flexible, we can actually add elements to the slice. So let's say we wanted to add elements at the end of the slice. To do that, we're going to have numbers. We're going to set it equal to append the numbers slice. And after this, we're going to provide the values that we want to add. So let's say we want to add 4, 5, 6. So again, to see the changes, we're going to print it out again. Now we can save our file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to arrays and slices, and we're going to run go run slice.go. As you can see from the output, the slice has been updated with the new values 4, 5, and 6. A function is a block of code that performs a specific task. So we've already seen functions in our code before, like the main function. So to see it in depth, we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it functions. And we're going to create a new file called functions.go. We're going to have our main package and we're going to import fmt and we're going to define our main function. So to create a function, we're going to use a similar syntax to the main function. So outside the main function. So let's say we want a function that is going to greet the user. So we're going to have the func keyword, and we're going to give our function a name. Let's give it greet. And we're going to have these parentheses. So when the parentheses are empty, that means our function takes in no input, like the main function takes in no input, and we're going to have a block of code. So in our case, we simply want to print out hello world. Now to actually use this function, we're going to head back to our main function, and we're simply going to pass in the name of the function followed by parentheses. Now if this function took inputs, we would have to provide different values, but in this case it takes no input. So we can save this and open our terminal. We're going to navigate to the functions folder, and we're going to run functions.go. As you can see, hello world gets displayed to the terminal. Now let's look at a function that takes in input. So outside the main function, we're going to define a function called add numbers, which is going to have two inputs, so two numbers to add. We're going to give the first one a name of n1. Then we have to define its data type, which is going to be int. We're also going to have n2, and we're going to provide int. Now inside this add numbers function, we're simply going to add n1 plus n2. So let's say we wanted to store the output of this function into a variable. In that case, we want to return this value. Instead of printing it out, we're going to use the keyword return. So we're going to have return n1 plus n2. Now we can use this value in different cases. We can either store it in a variable, we could use it in conditions, and so on. Now, since the return type is going to be an integer, that means n1 plus n2 is also going to be an integer. We're going to define that between the opening curly brace and the closing parentheses. So in here, we're going to pass in int. Now we can go to our main file, and to use this function, as we said, we're going to have its name. And this time we need to provide inputs. Since it takes inputs, we're going to give it two numbers. Let's give it 20 and 10. Now this is simply going to return the value. So let's store it in a variable. So let's define a variable called result of type int. And we're going to set result to whatever the add numbers function returns. And finally, we're going to print the value of result. Now we can save our file and open the terminal, and we're going to run the same command. As you can see, the sum gets displayed, which was 20 plus 10, which is equal to 30. Pointers allow us to directly work with memory addresses. So in simple terms, a pointer is a special type of variable that is used to store addresses. So to see this, we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call it pointers and addresses. And we're going to create a new file called pointers.go. And we're going to have our package main. And we're going to import fmt. And we're going to define our main function. So first, we're going to see what a memory address is. So let's define a variable called number of type int, and we're going to give it a value of, let's say, 5. Now to print the address of this variable, we actually saw the syntax when we were using the scan function. So to print the address, we're going to be using the end character. So let's print out the value and the address of the number variable. So we're going to first print out number by itself. And we're also going to print out the address of the variable. So let's save this file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to pointers and addresses, and we're going to run pointers.go. Now, as you can see, first the value gets printed out, which was 5, and next the address gets printed out. So when we go to this address in our memory, we're going to find the value 5. So as I said, pointers are simply special type of variables that store addresses. So to define a pointer, we're going to have var, And the name of the pointer, let's give it num pointer. And we're going to have the asterisk character. And finally, we're going to have the data type of whatever this pointer is going to point to. So in our case, it's going to point to an integer, and we're going to give it the value of the number address, which we can access using the AND character. So one thing you can do with pointers is what is called dereferencing. That means you can access the value that is stored in the address. You can also modify this value. So to see this, let's print out different statements. So first, we're going to print out a string that says using pointer. So when we want a dereference, we're going to use the asterisk character again. So we're going to have asterisk followed by the name of the pointer, which we misspelled here. So we're going to have num pointer. So this is going to return the value of whatever the number address stores, which in our case is going to be 5. Now, when we want to modify this value, we can use dereferencing again, and simply we can set it equal to a new value, let's say 10. Now, to see that this has changed, we're going to have another print statement, and we're going to say updated value, and we're going to print the number variable. Now we can save our file and open the terminal. We're going to navigate to pointers and addresses, and we're going to run pointers.go. So as you can see, using the pointer, we could access the value of number, and we can also update the value, which as you can see, the value of the number variable has been updated from 5 to 10. So this has been a full beginner's guide to the Go programming language. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.